Welcome back, everybody, to the global panel discussion. It's a discussion on regulatory, policy, and industry approach to combat drug shortages. Diane Hustead has already been introduced. She's well placed to moderate this panel discussion, as she is the chair of the ISPE Drug Shortages Initiative team. She will introduce her own panel members. So over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Bob. And hello again to everybody. As Bob mentioned, I'm the chair of the ISPE Drug Shortage Initiative team. And like Rich, I have had the opportunity to visit Singapore on a couple of occasions and enjoyed it tremendously. I even tried a durian. While I found durians to be an acquired taste, which I have not yet acquired, visiting Singapore was a wonderful experience. So I am disappointed that I'll only be attending here virtually. But that said, I thank ISPE Singapore for the invitation to be here, and it is my honor, truly, to moderate the discussion with this distinguished panel of experts on the very important topic of drug shortage prevention. Tom Hartman mentioned in his opening presentation that the global interest around drug shortage prevention is significant, and I can echo that observation. The interest from global regulators to improve drug shortage prevention precedes COVID. However, efforts were propelled into warp speed as a result of the pandemic, and many markets are moving fast. As Jerry mentioned, there are even now added market pressures of inflation and pricing to make things even more difficult. So while there are many opportunities to consider for holistic drug shortage prevention, today we will focus our panel discussion on technical, manufacturing, quality, and regulatory aspects of drug shortage prevention. And I hope you can see the slide that I have on the screen. Fantastic. So I've listed here a few of the topics that our panelists and I had talked about prior to this event as being top of mind in drug shortage prevention. So to start this session, what we're going to do is go around the table, if you will, and ask each panelist to introduce themselves, provide some opening comments, and really just a brief statement on what they find right now to be most pressing on their mind regarding drug shortage prevention. So with that introduction, I would like to hand over the floor to Rich and ask for him to share an introduction with everyone.
Yep. No, that's great, Diane. Thank you so much. I figured you picked me because I'm the top on the tile list as it goes down, because that's usually how I do all my picks when I'm in other meetings. My name is Rich Pelt. I did a presentation earlier around the COVID vaccine. I'm with Pfizer in the vaccine CMC regulatory sciences group. I've been with that company about 19 years now. All in all, been doing various stages of CNC regulatory for about 25, 30 years now. And I guess around drug shortage, I guess what comes to my mind is the COVID vaccine itself. And I think we're kind of coming out of that whole pandemic state. But what happened during that time, and I think, Diane, your presentation accentuated that we saw a lot of cracks in the armor, and it showed us some cracks. It showed us the areas in which we could probably do some things better going forward. As you say, in forecasting, the pandemic told us we had zero. You couldn't forecast that, but what can you do to make that time up? So in a regulatory space, that's what we're always looking at. What can we do to make that time up in a shortage situation, any kind of crisis, especially in the vaccine world. So that's kind of what's on my mind. Thanks, Diane.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich. So we'll move to Joyce next.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and good morning, everyone. Looking at drug shortages, this poses risk to patients as a result of non-treatment, under-treatment, possible medication errors from attempts to substitute missing drugs. We do have a whole lot of challenges during the pandemic, and learning from that, we are now at the post-pandemic era. So now we are looking at how the policies, without sacrificing safety, efficacy, and quality, the pandemic experience, transfer it to post-pandemic, but making sure that no compromises are being not looked into. So we look at the policy changes like improving manufacturing and supply chain resilience. We're also looking at streamlining regulatory processes and collaboration and communication, because this is what got us through COVID, or this is what got us through the pandemic. And now we are transferring it into policy and not through emergency use authorizations. And hopefully, in time, we'll be able to prevent, should there be any future shortages like what the pandemic situation presented to us. Hopefully, we'll be able to address them in the shortest time possible. Over to you, Diane.
Excellent. Thank you, Joyce. Vimal, we'll turn to you next.
Thank you very much, Diane, and good morning good afternoon, good morning to everybody. My name is Vimal Sachdeva, and I have been working with the World Health Organization at their headquarters in Geneva as a GMP inspector for past 13 years. And of course, before I joined WHO, I used to work with the Singapore's Health Sciences Authority as a GMP as well as a CMC assessor. Now, coming back to the drug shortage or shortages, first of all, I would like to say that the shortages of medicines and vaccine have been reported in countries of all income levels in many years, because this has been going on for some time. Now, from a WHO point of view, WHO plays a fundamental role in ensuring access to safe, effective, and quality medicines around the world through its strategic and normative work, which we have been doing it for many years, and also providing technical support at the global, regional, and national levels. So it is indeed a very important issue, and we are here to discuss about their potential root causes and some of the solutions for the next 30 minutes or so. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to David next.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I'm David Churchward. I'm currently part of the global quality team in Lonza's Cell and Gene Technologies unit. I was previously a GMP inspector with the UK MHRA for 17 years, so I've got some experience of managing multi-market shortage notifications from the regulatory perspective, and also more recently mitigating the risk of shortages from the industry side. And I think two areas of commonality that I've experienced from these different perspectives are firstly, the importance of communication with timely reporting and engagement with all of the relevant parties. And I think, we can see here on the slide that refers to health authority engagement, which is absolutely necessary. But I think I'd also extend that to all manufacturing supply chain participants in the prevention of shortages. Shortage of raw materials and starting materials can equally impact the availability of the finished medicine. And the second area of commonality is the visibility to the patient, because by maintaining that visibility to the patient, it enables risk-based decision making based on the public health need, which I think is really important in deciding how some of these issues can be managed when they do occur. I think during today's session, we're likely to hear about shortage prevention at scale. So, global supply chains, high volume products, and large patient populations. But I think we also need to recognize the equally significant patient impact that can occur from supply disruption of personalized medicines. Shortage takes on a different meaning in the context of things like autologous therapies. Often these are a one-time supply opportunity due to the very short supply of starter material from the patient themselves, and often with urgent clinical need. And while the principles as we can see here, of things like supply chain resiliency, quality disruptors, and forecasting. They're equally important to all product types. I think the implementation of the supply disruption mitigations for personalized medicines might differ compared to large volume products. And I think going forward, that's likely to be a future complexity as treatment modalities develop towards these models of more personalized medicines and distributed manufacturing models. So I think we also need to consider those type of cases as we go forward. But I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And Sherry, our last introduction.
Hi, Diane, and hopefully my technical issues are much better. So Gerard Dempsey, living in Japan. I work with Amgen. I've been in Japan for many, many years now. This is about 20 years at this stage. So Japan, I think, is a market where product shortages can have detrimental impacts on not just the patients. They would have long-term reputation issues as well for companies, and tarnished reputation can have immeasurable business setbacks. So generally, companies expend a lot of effort in Japan to regain the trust of the regulator, HCPs, and patients. Typically, the companies are more risk averse in Japan, so we tend to hold a lot more inventory in Japan than we would in other markets in Asia or even globally. There's a genuine fear of stocking out here. It's really not an option at all, and I'm sure it's not an option in any market, but here, it's very much a fear factor. And we tend to spend a lot of time agonizing over forecasts. To be fair, the forecasting is pretty high in Japan, but I'm not entirely sure if that's a consequence of market stability rather than our forecasting capability. So it is a critical element, forecasting for sure, to assure the supply continuity and to avoid drug shortages. But there's a lot of topics in the mix, as you can see on the screen. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion as well. Thanks, Diane.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry. And that ends our round of introduction. So if I could ask the ISPE coordinators to stop the slide, that would be helpful for our next section. So we're going to kick off the questions to the panelists with Jerry. I have a question for you regarding what opportunities do you see for industry in drug shortage prevention? There's quite a number of potential solutions. As I mentioned earlier in the drug shortage prevention model, we see 12 key areas of performance that we need to all excel in, but I'm sure there's some things that you've noticed. I heard you mention AI and blockchain earlier. I'm not sure if you want to touch on those. I'll leave the floor to you on whatever you'd like to share, but what do you see as opportunities?
Yeah, the question itself is really massive. There are so many various diverse aspects to that. And I tend to break it down into 4 areas, really. So you've got your manufacturing operations, and on the other side, there's the commercial side of the business and sales and marketing. And then there are the external factors like economy, and how our government policies shaping how we do things. And then finally, I would think about, the unforeseen events, such as natural disasters, which we have a lot of here in Japan, unfortunately. And even the likes of, off-label usage or some, criminality, which is, things that we cannot control. These are all items that could actually influence or have an adverse impact on our ability to supply. And you could take each one of those areas. So manufacturing, certainly, we would need to have very good S&OP, sales and operations planning processes, proper forecasting that I mentioned already, good capacity planning and really good long-term planning. Commercial would need to really understand the difference between the type of products. I think David talked about types of products earlier, in terms of, having adequate stocks of medically critical products as opposed to, products that are, possibly available through other channels. And then, economy, we try and influence as much as possible our regulators to help us ensure that the regulations are not so stringent that they actually impact supply continuity. And then, of course, business continuity plans, as much as possible, try to introduce good, robust business continuity plans to cover all of the areas that I mentioned earlier. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff in there, Diane. So I'm really skirting the surface on a lot of things, but perhaps some of our colleagues can bring us more into depth on any specific topic there.
Excellent. Well, maybe I'll ask the same question of David too. What opportunities do you see for industry and drug shortage prevention?
Yeah, thanks. And maybe to kind of agree with what Joey's just outlined there, in those kind of four big areas. Maybe if I can kind of add some extra in two areas, really, perhaps what industry might be able to do on its own to prevent shortage, and then what industry might be able to do in collaboration with regulators to react to shortage if it occurs. So in terms of what can we do in industry to prevent shortage, I think one of the key things for me, kind of on the operations side, is really to focus on the consistency and the reliability of the process. So really focusing on engineering out the possibility for error or contamination. We can still see here, I think on the slide, things like quality disruptors having an impact on supply availability. So really having those robust processes and embracing the concept of a control strategy as a risk management tool. So understanding where some of those kind of big events, the quality disruptors can occur, which then might lead to shortage, and what can we do to engineer those out and control for those. And I think in general, we're becoming much more risk-based, much more control strategy focused in the way that we operate as an industry. And I think we can apply that also with the lens of how do we use those tools to reduce the opportunity for supply disruptions to occur. Alongside that, we've got the whole thing that I talked about earlier around enhanced transparency throughout the supply chain. Really important that, Jerry mentioned the whole reputational piece. The patient just sees a shortage, and in many respects, the patient doesn't care whose fault it is; they just see the shortage. So, if you can't get a hold of your starting materials, it significantly impacts on the supply and the manufacturer of that finished drug product, because fundamentally they just can't supply. So making sure that we have that transparency through the supply chain, minimum notice periods of supply disruption. No one in a drug product manufacturing facility wants to hear that they're going to run out of starting materials tomorrow. They want to hear we might have a supply constraint in 3 months' time. Okay, how can we plan for that? So I think that transparency and early communication is important. And then also understanding the leading indicators of shortage or quality disruptions that enable meaningful mitigating action to be taken, so that we are trying to forecast forward, looking for those emerging issues that we can then deal with those. So that's what we can do on our own. I think the collaboration piece with regulators is that, what can we do to enable flexibility in the supply chain so that we can react and we can pivot to potentially alternative sources or alternative supply chains if needed. And in the past, I've seen redundancy as being sometimes proposed as a shortage mitigation. You're having availability of alternate manufacturing and supply sites and being able to switch rapidly between those sites. But the reality is that adds cost that health systems may not be able to afford. And it also creates complexity in filings and leads to regulatory burden and delay. So in that collaboration piece between industry and regulators, I think there may be opportunities in the future for us to work together to identify lower burden ways of enabling alternate supply chains so that we are able to react and pivot to alternative supply routes if the kind of the plan A, for whatever reason, is unable to supply.
Excellent. Thank you, David. That's wonderful points that you made there, and touching on just the complexity in risk management. I think it is not easy to consider what are the best options, and we need to think about the criticality of the medicine as well as the situation at hand. And you had mentioned the importance of the regulatory interaction. So I'd like to get some thoughts on the regulatory environment. So Vimal, if you could maybe share your thoughts on how the regulatory environment for drug shortages is evolving and how can companies prepare?
Thank you, Diane. I think if you ask me on this particular thing, I would like to say that, first of all, I think in order to address this particular issue, one should understand what are the potential root causes of these drug shortages and the vaccines as well. It has been a bit of a understanding that our common target was basically made to the active pharmaceutical ingredients as the main problem for the shortages. But this is not the actual root cause. And if you look at it, the supply chain challenges, and this has been going on, even after the pandemic. It has not been sort of like normalized yet. And there are a number of issues like the manufacturing components, such as the excipients, the packagings, and the other. They still continue to create delays in the manufacturing. So this is one of the issues actually, this has been also in a way causing and contributing to the drug shortages. Now, from a regulatory point of view, as I think very, very rightly alluded to by David and Jerry, I think, the regulatory authorities, they would have to work together, and not only together, but hand in hand. There is no choice, because we have to collaborate with the industry, with the other regulatory authorities, in order to ride on the work which has already been done by many other regulatory authorities. And I think, and this is where it is very important that the regulatory will and the political will. These are the two things which are very important in order to expedite overall approval, overall post-market changes and everything, so that it will definitely help in in a way expediting the overall approval process, and in turn it will basically reduce the shortages of the drugs. I can also give you some examples what WHO has been doing it. I can just say from a WHO point of view, WHO keeps a database on shortages where it basically harvests publicly available data to analyze these shortages. Now, because of the pandemic, this particular database has been closed, and it is going to be open later in 2023. So this database, although it is a members only platform, but it basically provides a very good overview of the in a way status on the shortages of the specific medicines. And in addition to that, the WHO has also been working very, very closely with a number of national regulatory authorities in order to get the correct figure, because I think it is also very important that we do not get the responses, and a number of authorities in the national setup, they do not provide the exact figure, and that is where actually WHO is also not able to forecast on the shortages of certain medicines. Having said that, I would also like to highlight that WHO has identified around 126 medicines which are on the WHO model list of essential medicines. So these are some of the things because they have got a direct impact on the health, in a way, healthcare systems. So this is what WHO has been doing it, but it is very important that I think in order to expedite overall this particular issue, it is important that various regulatory authorities, including the respective government, they should be working together. They should be leveraging on the work which has been done by other regulatory authorities in order to expedite the overall approval and to, in a way, ensure that there are no shortages of the drugs. Yes, so with this, I would like to hand over back to other regulators as well as the ex-regulators. They can also chip in, they can also share their perspective. Over to you, Diane.
That's perfect, Vimal. Thank you. And with that lovely segue that you just teed up, I'd like to hear Joyce's thoughts on, the regulatory environment and how companies can prepare.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diane, and thank you for the segue, Vimal. Now, looking at drug shortages, it could be just on the surface, brand name drug shortages, and sometimes it is really a real drug shortage. In the Philippines, where I'm a national regulatory authority member, we look at how the drug shortage is affecting. So there are a lot of regulatory pathways that we can use, but sometimes it is brought about by a drug brand shortage only. We had it, but there are so many other generic names of the same, but the brand was what was really asked by the consumer or the patients. Now, having said this, in the real sense of drug shortages, there has to be collaboration between regulatory bodies. Not only in where I came from the Philippines, we had to coordinate with other drug regulatory authorities, also pharmaceutical manufacturers, how to augment the supply. But we do have a database. The consumers can check how many generic names are there of a given product. But having said that, unexpected demand changes or fluctuations can also lead to drug shortages, like what happened during the pandemic. So nowadays, we're looking at how our national guidelines on drug registration is going to prepare the whole country for future events that are beyond our control. So we, as a national regulatory authority, we are using all regulatory flexibilities, learning from the pandemic, and now we are transposing it to the post-pandemic, like revisiting existing regulations which were written before the pandemic, and that we had difficulty using it, and now we are looking at how this can be revisited, revised, amended, so that it will be very receptive. There is regulatory flexibility during shortages, adjustments. So we are currently posting these new regulations. For the Philippines, the health declaration has already been lifted. So we are now in full speed in making sure that the Philippines will be ready for future, not only drug shortages, but for future eventualities. There are challenges, like what Vimal had said. There are political challenges as well. However, if there is at the end good preparation involving manufacturers and having a supply chain resilience, diversion of supplies, raw materials to boost supply chain resilience, stockpiling. However, we cannot stockpile. We are not a rich country, but enough supply to go, say, few months. That would be best. And then streamlining regulatory processes. That's what we are doing now. Streamlining regulatory processes to make both the supply and demand part ready for whatever eventuality of any shortage. And Lastly, is the collaboration and communication as well. We have to enhance communication, not only as a regulatory agency, but amongst manufacturers, healthcare providers. Information has been coming to us that this is out of stock and things like that. So we are immediately looking at it and how we can augment the supply, not necessarily on the same brand, but on the same generic, and informing through media releases, advisories, telling the people, don't be scared. There are still products available of the same generic name, but a different brand, which are registered with the Food and Drug Administration Philippines, so that we can inform the public that there are other supplies. If there is really no other supply, then we implement other pathways. We have already reliance pathways available. So we do have a lot, and we can facilitate if there is a need. Over to you, Diane.
Excellent. Thank you, Joyce. That was a wonderful overview, both from Vimal and Joyce, on some really current thinking and progress in the regulatory environment, and really some good insight on how companies should be thinking moving forward. So I'd like to turn to a different question for Rich, and that is, can you provide an example of a common misperception in drug shortage prevention?
Yeah, I can. I love that question. And I think a lot of the topics or the discussion points of my friends here kind of hit on that. One of the interesting examples, and I will talk about the pandemic, and I'm not talking about drug shortages caused by the pandemic. I'm going to talk about the drug shortage of the vaccine that, I talked about earlier itself. By definition, there was a drug shortage immediately on day zero. There was immediately a drug shortage. We had zero, and we needed about 10 billion doses. So that in itself causes some interesting challenges, obviously, in the manufacturing challenges, the development challenges, supply chain, cold chain, all those different things. And then we'll go to the one in which I'm so fond of, the regulatory challenges. One of the things that came about is it was very clear that, just in my own neighborhood, people that aren't involved directly with it, as well as in some cases, some regulators, we can't simply make more. You can't simply just turn it up. You can't punch your Amazon and say, send me more vaccine doses. And Amazon drops you a box and you're good. You can't just do that. There was a little bit of confusion around that. I guess the example I'm going to talk about is there was a case in which we were rapidly trying to increase our capacity. You go from process A, we can make 100 million a month or whatever. And then we're trying to, we figured out how to do it and we scaled it up. Now we can make 500 million a month. I'm just giving you examples. Don't quote me on any of this stuff. I'm making stuff up. But when you go from that process to that process, everyone sitting here knows that triggers a regulatory event. You can't just make it that way because you changed something. You got to go through the regulatory filings and all that. Well, everything was happening so fast that some regulatory agencies said, whoa, time out. We can't review your dossier that fast. You need to hang on. We can't review it that fast. And we said, well, if you can't review it that fast, we can't get material to you because we don't have compliant material because we've already moved on. Everyone else has approved the 500 million process. The 100 million process is done. We can't make it that way. And they said, well, just give us some 100 million process material. We don't have any. Why? We stocked out. Why? Because everybody in the world wants it. It was kind of that realization that we are running at a zero inventory continuously. And it took some real, we literally brought our supply chain person. I think we got some supply chain people around who could literally show them the output of their inventory, and it was always negative. every single day, negative inventory, negative, negative, negative. The ultimate in supply shortage. And that messaging, it took hold. But it was interesting when I'm like, wow, it's just somewhere, it just didn't get into the cerebral cortex, that it just is not that simple as to just turn on a switch and more comes out and you just send it on its way. And so that's kind of one of those examples. But I think some of the topics sit on the same thing. It's like you just can't turn it on, so you have to kind of plan on how do you turn it on, and can you build in these contingencies, dual sourcing? Yeah, it's great, but it costs money, it costs time, and all that stuff. Can you stock build? Yeah, it's great, but it costs money and it costs time and it has risk. All those different things you can do, all the way down the supply chain. So I thought that was a very interesting one, just because I remember having those discussions late nights just like this, talking about, oh, well, we have zero supply right now.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that example. I think we had another example. David, did you want to share an example of a common misperception as well?
Yeah, sure. And maybe kind of one from my previous life as a regulator. I think from having spoken to companies that were in a shortage situation at the time, there was often a common misperception that if they report a shortage or a potential shortage to a regulator, that the next day they were going to have an inspection, knock on the door, and a bunch of inspectors turn up to work out what's going on. And really, in my experience of managing many of these cases, not just for the UK, but working with other regulators on global impact shortage situations, that never really happened. The key information that the regulators, when I was working on these cases, were looking for was, what's the product, what's the cause of the shortage, what's the magnitude of that shortage? Is it just a supply constraint or a real stock out? And what's the plan to fix it? And in the vast majority of cases, industry were able to say, look, here's the situation. This is what we're doing to fix it. And the answer was, great, thanks very much for letting us know. Carry on. In many cases, and to trigger some kind of additional regulatory activity or an inspection actually would have impeded the work to get through that shortage situation and make the case better. So I can understand, now being on perhaps the other side of the table, that sometimes there's a reticence from industry to go to regulators to say, hey, we've potentially got a problem here. But my experience from working on those is that the regulators, they want to know what's going on. They're willing to support industry's plans to get back into a stable supply situation. And it's super helpful to know whether this is something that industry's own supply chains can manage, or whether other interventions, such as maybe communications to prescribers around limited clinical use or maintaining patients already on the medicine, etc., whether those type of measures are also needed to help smooth out those bumps in the road until we can get back to steady state. So I think that kind of relates to the transparency and the reporting and the engagement piece as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that, David. And I just want to reiterate, I think we've heard throughout this conversation several times over the importance of communication, not only with regulators, but across the company, across partners, third-party manufacturers, suppliers, and so forth. And I just wanted to kind of call out and build on what David was saying about reaching out to regulators. ISPE, since our earliest days with the publication of our first drug shortage prevention plan, we have advocated for that engagement, that appropriate engagement with health authorities. So I think those of us in the industry recognize there are many times where things may happen behind the scenes and we've got it covered. But for the situations where, we really may be facing a supply disruption with patient impact, it is really important to have those constructive conversations with the respective health authorities, and to have a plan for how you want to prevent these situations. And if that doesn't work, have a plan for how you're going to react to these situations. And I will offer up that having alignment across your company is so important. The teamwork necessary to ensure that we're working in lockstep and having the same messaging and the appropriate messaging is really dependent on having a policy or procedure within your company of how you're going to prevent and how you're going to mitigate or respond to these situations. And last comment I'll make is give that plan a whirl before the real event. You know, I've been part of some mock-up shortage situations or mock-up large-scale event situations, and you dust off your plan and you try to see how it might work in a situation, and you really do learn from it, even outside of a real event. So there's really a lot of opportunity to be proactive, as well as to be as productive and successful as possible in an event by having risk management planning thought out in advance and available to everybody. So that's my thread to layer on what I've heard here today, because I heard communication several times from several of the speakers, and it really is one of the most important topics out there in terms of what regulators and the sort of the overall landscape is thinking about. So that leaves us with just a couple of minutes left. I am not seeing any questions, but I have to say I may be having some technical difficulties there. So if somebody sees a question in the question area, let me know. And if not, is there anybody that would like to add in a last thought based on all of the information that has been shared thus far?
Diane, can I come in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll go straight to collaboration and communication, as alluded to by experts here in the panel. It has to be enhanced communication between regulators, not only within the country, or manufacturers not only within the country, but worldwide, because sometimes the supply comes from another area. It's not even in the country itself. If it's within the country, then it'll be easier because we can call immediately for a meeting. But if it's outside the country, then it has to be appropriately communicated. A critical strategy for combating drug shortages is effective communication that will identify and address supply issues early on and not a knee-jerk reaction, and coordinate responses. So if it comes from another part of the world, if there are changes in manufacturing areas, inform the target parts of the world so that the regulators there can act on it, because the regulators can facilitate. However, if it's a last-minute information of a drug shortage, the regulators will need enough time as well to make the necessary moves to help supply the market with a given product. International cooperation as well is crucial for building a resilient and sustainable pharmaceutical supply chain. Lectures, advocacies on how things should be, how all parts of the supply chain through continuous training, continuous advocacies, so that there will be no disruptions. There are new industry personalities, so they have to learn from those who have been wiser, and I cannot say older, but wiser in age, because they do have the historical experience that can speed up the process. They don't have to land crawling. They have to running because there is a drug shortage, and it is needed by some patients across, or not only in one area, but all over the world. So there has to be a clear communication and collaboration. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Joyce. That was really helpful. additional comments there. Any other thoughts from the panel?
Allow me to just again support what has been said. I think it is very important that international regulatory collaboration, harmonization, and convergence. And now we have to have this kind of understanding among all the regulatory authorities, and also we have to work very closely with the manufacturers in order to expedite the overall approval process, and that will definitely help in order to, in a way, combat the drug shortages. Thank you very much. Diane, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vimal. Jerry or Rich, did you have anything else you might want to add?
Only one last final thing from me. I just want to say everything you heard there about convergence and trying to get all, everybody together. It's not there, of course, but it's funny, after this pandemic, pardon my French, hell, I feel it kind of going that way a little bit. There's some things happening that I'm kind of like, wait a minute, they're talking to them? Oh, well, that's great. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we are at least taking some steps forward to that ideology.
Excellent. Thank you.
And Diane, I just build on that a little bit and say that we do have some divergence in Asia around our health authorities. It's not as good as you might have in Europe, for example, but hopefully in the future there will be improvement there. But in the meantime, I think we need to start focusing internally in our own organizations. In particular, the marketing and commercial organization can do a really good job at being knowledgeable about their market, having a really good relationship with the regulator, the local regulator, and doing all the work that Vimal and Joyce have espoused and said, look, we need to create those strong relationships, and that's where we have some control within our own organizations to ensure that we're building that type of knowledge and capability in commercial. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Perfect. And your last word, David? Any words of wisdom?
I think it's been covered at it very well by the other speakers. I don't think I have anything further to add. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I think we went a few minutes over. I hope the audience could appreciate why it's such a complex topic, and great thinkers here on the call, and excellent conversation and insight. If you'd like to learn more, please check out the ISPE website, particularly the drug shortage prevention model. Feel free to reach out to me to make any connections, and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you for tuning in. Bye, everyone.